everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I am very happy to announce that Heather Shee from Microsoft, she's one of their Azure Global Black Belts, will be joining me here on this webinar to discuss the top 5 reasons Azure customers are moving to Aviatrix. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you. Happy to be here with you today.
Nice to have you. So the agenda goes like this. So we're going to cover an intro to Aviatrix. I'll cover that quickly. And then we'll go into why multi-cloud. And then we'll go through the 5 top reasons: accelerate deployments, extending native capabilities, solving operational challenges. And then we'll dig a little bit into a couple of common use cases, advanced use cases that we see out in the field. How does that sound?
Sounds wonderful.
Perfect. So let me start by going briefly through an introduction to Aviatrix. So Aviatrix, we are an enterprise-grade cloud networking and security software platform. And what we are good at is helping customers do well in public clouds. What does that mean? We abstract complexity, we simplify cloud networking, and we take all the goodness that the clouds give us, and we extend those capabilities to help customers address some of the more advanced use cases and some of the more difficult and complex use cases that they run into the cloud. And what we do is we build this platform and we help customers build these repeatable architectures as a common operational model. We have over 500 customers, and I just grabbed kind of a snapshot of some of our customers here. And we have been featured in Gartner a few times, and I am proud to say that we have 36 of the Fortune 500 customers. And I just briefly wanted to read. So one of the quotes out of the Gartner article was, organizations looking for advanced networking functionality missing from native public cloud providers and or those that desire a consistent networking console across multiple public cloud providers should shortlist Aviatrix. So listen closely. So now what we do is we'll talk a little bit about the evolution of how networking kind of went through in phases. And initially we had the data center networking where Cisco built these models where the access aggregation, distribution layers, and then everything kind of started to get virtualized. And what those 2 phases had in common is we owned the infrastructure. That was our infrastructure. We had access to everything. We could pull everything. We had SNMP for everywhere. And then as we started adopting cloud and we moved there, everything shifted into the cloud. Then we kind of lost some of that. And what we do is we're kind of like the red dot you see there. We provide customers that visibility and the enterprise grade networking across all of the multiple clouds, bringing that centralized control for customers. If we kind of look at our solution, so number 1, we're not a SaaS or managed service. We are a marketplace item that you can provision directly from each provider. The controller can run in any of the clouds, whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP, OCI, or even Alibaba. You can orchestrate the controller there, and from there you can orchestrate the rest of your platform across the multiple clouds. And then that would be the control plane. Our data plane are the Aviatrix gateways, and these are orchestrated from that controller, from that centralized plane, and then distributed across the different clouds, bringing those advanced services that I mentioned earlier. Another point is we are a Terraform provider, so through a single code against our provider, you can provision the different clouds on the back end, as I mentioned before, AWS, Azure, GCP. We also are able to talk with native constructs. So we understand cloud, we're able to orchestrate native constructs. And on top of that, we can orchestrate and manage third-party products such as next-gen firewalls like Fortinet, Checkpoint, Palo Alto, and then perform service insertion. And then on top of that, we build through Copilot dynamic topologies. We give you all the NetFlow data through your infrastructure. We give you all of your gateways, the way they're provisioned, their status, their up and down, latency between links. So we bring all of that visibility kind of built out of the box. So if we dig a little bit deeper, what our solution does is we're able to build that infrastructure, whether it's a single cloud, multi-account. We build those hub and spoke architectures with high availability end-to-end encryption in mind. And then that network correctness, what does that mean? That means that we go all the way to the spoke and provision your route tables, all the way to the BGP advertisements to on-prem. We build that end-to-end network correctness. And we can do that whether it's in a single region or across multiple regions. And we can extend that across to multiple clouds. And then on top of that, we can build that high performance encryption, not just from on-premises into the cloud, but across that cloud as well. Another thing is we can build segmentation. So think about this. We can create these security domains in a cloud where we isolate VNets from each other, but we can extend that security segmentation across multiple clouds as well. And then, as I mentioned before, we can perform service insertion. So things like next-gen firewalls. From our controller, you can orchestrate the third-party NVA, which would be either a Palo Alto, a Fortinet checkpoint. We can orchestrate them, insert them inline in our FireNet solution, and service chain traffic through easy to work on workflows in our controller to be able to insert those firewalls. Now, everything, as I mentioned, can be viewed and streamed through our Copilot day 2 operations and visibility platform. And then obviously we provide secure access for users and for ingress and egress of traffic. So that's kind of the overview. And final point number 10 here, which I missed, is we can orchestrate native VNet peering. So if native constructs, I mentioned that before, not only can we build gateways and build our hub and spokes, we can also orchestrate those native constructs. So now we'll get into the top 5 reasons why Azure customers are moving to Aviatrix. So Heather, I wanted to first, before we go into this, is look at why multi-cloud? Why are we having this discussion, right? So why multi-cloud? What I did is I grabbed some of the points that are really common that come up in conversations, and I wanted to see how this resonates with you. So number 1 is cloud diversification. As customers, as they're building their infrastructures in cloud, they don't, they want to mitigate some risk. They want to spread the blast radius from, not just have everything in one basket and kind of spread that across. Is that something that resonates with Azure customers that you deal with on a day-to-day basis?
For sure, Manny. Many customers, rightly or wrongly, like the idea of multi-cloud, so they are not stuck with one cloud. So like what you say, having all their eggs in one basket. So from what we see, it's very typical for a customer to have presence in Azure, in AWS, and also have private cloud, either on-prem or in a colo. So yes, that point.
Exactly. Yep. And that's exactly what we see in our day-to-day conversations. So another point that I wanted to cover is, the adoption of best of breed, right? So if I start out in AWS, I build this entire infrastructure, and then I want to leverage things like SQL, in Azure or AKS or any of those IoT Hub or any of those, Windows Virtual Desktop services that Microsoft has, right? That's one of the main reasons we see customers moving. Is basically expanding and taking some of that the best of breeds from across the crowd. I bet you see that a lot. New customers coming into Azure to adopt SQL, Windows Virtual Desktop. So how often does that topic come up to include multi-cloud and the fact that part of the strategy is to leverage a best of breed?
That comes up quite a bit. There are definitely some killer applications, for lack of a better term, that drive customer adoption to the cloud. For example, customers are excited to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop or Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, or Azure Identity. So naturally, that gravitates them to Azure. Similarly, some of those customers would find compelling applications in AWS, and then before the customer knows it, they are multi-cloud.
Perfect. Yeah, that aligns exactly with what we see in the conversations we have with customers. So another point is driving, customers to multi-cloud is, third-party integrations, whether it's a business-to-business communication or, mergers and acquisitions, that conversation comes up a lot. And obviously those situations, bring a lot of complexity, into play. So I think this one kind of speaks for itself. And so you speak to customers every day, right? So how often does complexity come up during network and security integrations into Azure?
Oh, it comes up all the time. And since you mentioned M&A, that is quite common, right? So
Hmm. Hmm.
a AWS shop come together with an Azure shop. So both sides would love to see a common framework. For example, how do you translate security and network policies into one? How do security groups, SGs in AWS map to NSGs in Azure, for example? And the complexity of how you define routes in AWS, how does that translate to defining UDRs in Azure, for example? Customers would love to see this unified and simplified.
Exactly. And that, I made a comment the other day, and, one of my friends' LinkedIn post, which was, you don't know what you don't know. And, sometimes customers will go into cloud and they don't realize that, yes, AWS has their security elements, security groups, their load balancers. It's a whole list of things, but so does Azure, and they have their nuances, and each one requires kind of a little bit of a skill to be able to get right. Now, the final point, I think, is one that definitely comes up quite a bit, through conversations, and it's the fact that just pricing pressures. The business demands it. The business is dictating what we do and what we adopt, right? So is that a conversation that comes up a lot? It's like, where we want to take advantage of those Microsoft honoring on-prem licenses for SQL or for Windows Server. Those are the things that we see. And I think at the end of the day, right, the overarching theme about why multi-cloud is the business aspect, right? Businesses are undertaking cloud journeys for many reasons, whether to reduce expenses, reducing overhead, to free up capital, increase agility, modernizing applications. The market shift is massive, and it's one of the biggest shifts we've ever seen. And if it's true that less than 5% of all IT spend is in cloud, then I mean, this is just the beginning.
Yes, I totally agree with that. There is much more to grow. And I would say regularly I am responding to RFPs. And tying
Hmm.
back to the first point of cloud diversification, even if a company decides they really want to just stay with um, one cloud provider,
Hmm. Hmm.
the idea of having a second one, even if it's a small pocket in their network, is felt by the organization that negotiates contracts as
Hmm.
a way of keeping leverage, if you
Got
will.
it.
So yes,
got,
pricing pressures is
got
it
it.
is of course key, right? And like what you say, there's much more to grow in cloud space.
Absolutely.
And I
Absolutely.
more.
So that I wanted to cover, why multi-cloud, why we're having this discussion. So here's where we get into the top 5 reasons why Azure customers are moving to Aviatrix. So when we talk about accelerating deployments, and how Aviatrix plays a critical role, as we discussed in earlier slides, migrations, expansions, integrations have complexities built into them, whether it's, skill gap, or, having to deal with different security elements in each cloud, another routing domain to manage, having to design, install, manage, and monitor, another set of cloud elements. How do you see Aviatrix play a role in accelerating Azure deployments?
Well, to your point, simplification is key, right? Aviatrix abstracts the complexity of having to
Hmm.
all the cloud provider nuances when it comes to networking and security. You don't have to know the details of route tables or load balancers or network security groups. These are all elements that Aviatrix handles for you underneath the covers. Customers would love to have a single pane of glass.
That's right. And so another point is, repeatable architecture. So putting the right architecture in place and expand your cloud network is critical, right? And having an efficient, manageable infrastructure to meet the business requirements, which are, very dynamic. So Azure created the CAF, right? The Cloud Adoption Framework, to guide customers in their cloud journey. So, Heather, how does Aviatrix fit into these frameworks?
So I would say the way Aviatrix provides and creates customer network architectures are in line with the CAF, Cloud Adoption Framework recommendations. For example, when you're building a hub and spoke environment, whether in a single region or across regions or across geos, Aviatrix can accomplish this in a repeatable architecture, leveraging the gateways in the architecture. And that's exactly what CAF recommends when building your landing zones, leveraging repeatable architecture.
That's
And,
right.
oh, and I guess just uh, going back to your slide, a couple slides ago, right? What you showed
Mhm.
was a repeatable architecture, not just in Azure, but across clouds. So that's elegant.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of abstracting the complexity from customers is the ability to build these cookie cutter architectures and stamp them across multiple clouds and not having to worry about the nuances of the cloud, just be able to go through those intent-based workflows and deploy all this infrastructure without, without having to address that skill gap long term. And then, so another point here is the multi-cloud security transit. So we both know that managing and securing a single cloud it's critical and it's not an easy task, right? Now, multiplying that across multiple clouds and also exponentially increases the complexity. So from authentication methods like RBAC tokens, multiple APIs, next gen firewalls, security groups in AWS, NSGs in Azure, network load balancers in AWS, GLBs in public and internal load balancers in Azure. The task is complex and requires proper planning, design, and execution. So Heather, you're very familiar with details in Azure of having to secure cloud infrastructure and what it takes to build the architecture. So from what you know and have seen, of Aviatrix, how do we fit into accelerating multi-cloud security and building these secure transits?
So I think this goes back to the first point of simplicity.
Yeah.
Because Aviatrix can from a central control,
Hmm.
orchestrate security elements such as next generation firewalls and routing for service and insertion, that
Hmm.
makes it easy for a customer to deploy the controller, start building hub and spoke topologies, and start testing multi-cloud security and transit right away. So it's quite nice.
Yeah, and the key point, the final one here is IAC Terraform provider. So infrastructure as code. So the fact that we're a single Terraform provider, right? Any enterprise can come in and take that single provider and through that single provider be able to orchestrate across clouds. So how does how many customers do you deal with day to day or just overall on a day-to-day basis that are asking for some type of automation?
I would say every day and every customer.
That's what I thought.
I mean, because it's really all about automation in the cloud, right? I mean, they're
Yep.
always asking, how can we automate the deployment of NSGs or UDRs, whether using Terraform or some other mechanism? So it's quite top of mind.
Gotcha. Thank you. So now the second would be extending native capability. So one of the things that I used to get frustrated was, well, trying to do everything in cloud. It's not simple, right? There's a lot of tools. Everything is there, but it's kind of like the IKEA model. Here's all these tools, go build it yourself, right? So another reason why as your customers are moving to Aviatrix is the ability to extend those native capabilities. So let me ask you this: when you read their and you see overcome native limitations, how does that resonate with you and what you see in Azure?
So there are definitely some limits associated with subscription or service.
Hmm.
Um, for example, the number of VNet peerings. So
Right.
because Aviatrix essentially builds this elegant overlay network, it's not bound by these native limits that's otherwise in the hub spoke topology, right? Such as the native peering example. And furthermore, Aviatrix transit gateways can summarize routes
Hmm.
by custom advertisements in the gateway. So that can be helpful too for customers.
That's right. So things like route advertisements, those type of things, granularity, those are really, really powerful things that we can do. So, one of the things that our solutions capable is, advanced services such as, addressing IP overlap. So I kind of put that into sort of the advanced services piece there. So let me ask you this, and I know the answer, but I'm going to ask you. So Heather, extending native capability, something that customers need in many instances. So describe a little bit about IP overlap and those type of things that you see from customers having to deal with these integrations, these business to business connections or acquisitions. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and how we fit into that?
Sure. With regards to advanced services and specifically IP address overlap, we started talking about mergers and acquisitions earlier. And as a result of M&A, you're required to integrate different networks. What happens more often than not in these scenarios is these networks will be using overlapping network addresses. Everybody
That's
uses
right.
the 10 or the the RFC 1918 addresses, right?
Yep, it happens all the time.
Yep. And this is one of the areas where I think Aviatrix's solution for advanced services is quite compelling. It doesn't matter whether the spoke networks are overlapping with on-prem or spokes are overlapping with other spokes. Aviatrix can support this use case right out of the box. And I should mention that this is not just limited to mergers and acquisitions, right? In this area, in this era of interconnectedness, if that's a word, businesses have more and more need to share information with other businesses, like your B2B communications. They
That's
need
right.
to exchange data with each other, and having a solution that addresses overlapping CIDRs is basically key, right? Because these networks are using overlapping addresses, RFC 1918. Everybody uses it.
Yeah, and that's a very common use case that we see out in the field. And so the other point that I have up there is the topic of visibility and troubleshooting. So one of the things I love about our solution is how simple it is to deploy, how it simplifies things. But what I love most is how easy it is to orchestrate a centralized visibility and troubleshooting complex. So out of the box, whether it's single cloud, multi-cloud, we build this into our solution. So right away with our Copilot solution, we have end-to-end visibility. This is key, right? So monitoring and gaining visibility in the cloud is not an easy thing to achieve, even in a single cloud. Across multiple clouds is really, really difficult. And that's what we're really good at. And that's what we build into Copilot right out of the box. So the second thing, so I think you have an operational background like myself. One of the things I love is through our controller in a centralized point, I can run a PCAP at any point in the network. All those points are not just exporting NetFlow data, but I can go in there and actually grab a packet capture of traffic, and I can trace that traffic across the network, and all from a centralized place. I don't have to provision a tap. I don't have to do anything. It's already there. So I love how easy we make it. And most importantly, as the theme continues, Copilot helps the business, right? The ability to diagnose, isolate, and quickly address any issues in your cloud is one of those things that businesses love, right? If there's an outage, if there's an issue, if an application is performing badly, those things affect the business. And at the end of the day, right, we're just providing an infrastructure for the business to run. The business is what's important. And being able to reduce the time to isolate an issue, to fix an issue, I think it's critical. What's your take on that and what you see in Azure?
Manny, I agree with everything you say, right? And you're right. I did start my professional career many decades ago working in data center and networking operations, and I have true appreciation for what those in operations go through. There's nothing worse than being woken up in the middle of the night and being told an application is broken and not knowing how to fix the problem because you don't have visibility of what's going on. And this is where your superior visibility and troubleshooting capabilities helps the business, as you say, right? A Copilot can give you the ability to do capture logs, look at flow logs, and really pinpoint issues. And that really is important for mean time to recovery. And
Exactly.
I like to use the term mean time to innocence, right? Like
Right.
not the network's fault. So
That's right. Yeah, network
yeah,
is always blamed, right?
right. Mean time to innocence, MTTI.
That's right. So the final point there is, extending native capability. So one of the most common requests we get on the field from financial, healthcare customers, and actually many others outside of those verticals, is to encrypt at high speed. So customers ask us for end-to-end encryption, not just MACsec, or rely on CSP encrypting between, regions or between express route locations and regions. Compliance dictates that they own their encryption end to end. So what are some of the challenges you hear from the field when it comes to encrypting or encryption?
So customers are requiring higher and higher performance encryption. And as you know, encrypting end to end in cloud for high speeds has its limitations. And this
That's
really
right.
has to do with the way IPsec functions in the cloud. And it's not just limited to one cloud in particular. It's all the cloud providers. Across the board, IPsec is terminated on a single core, and
Hmm.
that caps you at about 1.25 gigabits per second. And I really appreciate the fact that the Aviatrix solution, you can basically go end to end at very high speeds at line rate of 10 gigabits per second.
That's right. And that's one of the, so as you start getting these express route circuits that are, 10 gig, 40 gig, 100 gig, right? That really starts to become important. Specifically, those financials and healthcare that need to have that encryption end to end, but it needs to be their encryption. They need to own it. So if we go into the next topic here of those 5 reasons that we look at, and solving operational challenges, right? So when it comes to solving operational challenges, right, this is one of the major points which our customers really focus on as they try to adopt a new cloud by expansion, or maybe just integrating with another partner. The ability to hand over the new infrastructure to operations is a big challenge, right? We hear from our customers anyway, as we mentioned in previous slides, right? Skills gaps, net new cloud nuances, and building security and monitoring in a second or third cloud exponentially increases the overhead on cloud teams, especially operational folks. So along with Aviatrix certified classes, which we offer, self-paced or professional, providing that day two operations is one of the things that Aviatrix excels in. So what cloud, as we know, cloud is complex, right? We're trying to make that easier. So how we solve it, right, is through that centralized control plane. And that visibility and troubleshooting. I mentioned NetFlow data that's exported from our gateways out of the box, right? There's nothing to enable or configure. You basically deploy our controller, deploy Copilot, turn it on. That's it. You're ready to go. And then one of the things that I remember in Azure that was kind of hard to do is the customer says, I need to deploy a firewall. So you deploy a firewall. Then it needs to be deployed in HA, right? So, okay, so now I need 2 firewalls. Now I need to configure a route table to point to that firewall. But if that firewall fails, I need to move that route table to the new firewall. So, okay, we need to orchestrate a load balancer. Then you orchestrate a load balancer, you point the UDR there, and now you have potential for asymmetrical issues, right? So you see how the complexity starts to compound, and having the ability to, insert segmentation, right, to do service insertion, and how important that is. And then obviously that having that Terraform provider, right, that solves a lot of operational challenges, because now teams don't have to maintain these different scripts for each cloud, because even though they all support Terraform, right, each Terraform for each cloud is different. So by programming against our Terraform provider, right, that's that single pane, that's that single provider that can provision all of the backend networks. And then obviously our Copilot solution is actually what brings all of these things together. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to go into, advanced use cases. So I would say these are top two reasons how we're able to help customers and help the acceleration of cloud adoption into Azure or expansions. And the first one was, we talked about it earlier. We'll kind of give a visual and we'll dig a little bit deeper, right? But overlapping CIDRs and then high performance encryption. So here you can see that as you start seeing these high speed circuits, 100 gig, right? Imagine 100 gig. Let's encrypt a 100 gig circuit and the challenges of that. Aviatrix is able to solve this through our high performance encryption, right? So if we look at how we do that, so the first diagram shows you how an IPsec tunnel is kind of pinned to a virtual CPU. The second one is we take multiple IPsec tunnels and we bind those and then multiplex them across one big fat high performance encryption tunnel. So Heather, tell me a little bit about some of the challenges that you see in Azure when you have these high performance tunnels that are being built or are required. And for example, in a large circuit like an express route circuit.
Right. So I think the picture kind of speaks to itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have had customers build multiple tunnels in order to support say 10 gig, but
Mm-hmm.
like you don't want to manage all these separate tunnels, right?
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, right?
No. I mean, can you imagine like, having to configure eight tunnels?
I'm trying to picture the
Yeah,
configuration and I can't.
yeah, and it's quite complicated, right? So I think like what you say, it speaks to itself. And yes, we are seeing more and more customers adopt ExpressRoute Direct, which, as you know, gives you either 10 gigabits per second times 2 dedicated ports, or two times 100 gigabits per second port, right?
Yeah.
And so in that case, you really do need a high performance encryption solution if the business requirement, as
Mm-hmm.
often is for FSI or state and local government that or federal, I guess, even though I don't work in that
Yep.
space.
We see that
that-
too. We
yeah.
do. Absolutely.
So even though, say you could do MACsec across this, customers may want this end-to-end encryption. And so, this up to 90 gigabits per second picture across one tunnel kind of speaks for itself, right? Basically, it's showing that you can handle the ExpressRoute Direct circuit at 10 gigabits
Yeah.
per
Yep.
second.
Near line rate. Exactly.
And
Yep.
even for 100 gigabits per second, it's near line rate, right? So
Exactly. Yeah. And then so what I wanted to show here is basically what you're able to do is you're able to encrypt at the speed of your circuit. So whether it's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, all the way up to 90, whether you need, you could possibly need, 40 gig from a spoke, from a spoke to a hub, right? We can build that. We can encrypt not just external connections into the hubs, into Azure, but we can do that across, from spoke to spoke, basically through our transit. So basically with our solution, you can encrypt that the end to end, to the speed of what the underlying infrastructure gives you. So that's the high performance encryption. So that the other topic that we talked about a little bit earlier was overlapping CIDRs, right? I think if I could say the one use case that we probably work on the most together is it's on this topic, right? Very large customers suffering from IP exhaustion. They have a very large global network with many subsidiaries, and they have specific asks, right? So we're specifically working with one big customer out of Brazil that has basically they've run out of IP addresses. Okay, so what they came to us and say, hey, we need to be able to set up all of our spokes with the same CIDR. So they want a hub and spoke. Those spokes need to overlap, and we need to be able to attach them to a hub. right? So obviously we can't do that natively, but however, the way that we set up our connections and our attachments, we're able to do that. And then through our gateways, we're able to resolve those type of requests, which are actually, pretty complex if you think about it. And so to solve this type of request, how would you go about resolving this with native? So if it's possible to do, how complex would it be? Is it something that you can manage long term?
So,
It's it's it's, it's
very
just
good
a trick
question.
question.
Yeah, no. It's not a trick question. So like what we already mentioned a couple times during this webinar, we see overlapping IP addresses
Mhm.
a lot. And, we do have the private link service solution, which can help address overlapping IP addresses, and it takes care of NAT
Mhm.
automatically underneath the covers. But private link service, though, I see as a layer 4 and above solution, and it requires some things specifically. So even though it solves the overlapping IP addresses, it assumes a provider consumer type relationship. So one side is a consumer and the other side is a
Exactly.
provider.
You need directional kind of conversation, right?
Exactly right. So it works well for some applications, TCP, UDP, and this is why I say it is very good for some classes of application. But the Aviatrix solution is more genericized because it's at the network layer. It's at layer 2, layer 3, and as such, it's able to support all applications that runs over it. There is no dependencies on direction, provider consumer relationship, etc.
Right. So so this one customer that I was referring to, so they're pretty large bottler, and they basically ran out of IPs, and it was so they said, all right, we need all of our spokes to have overlapping, and basically the spokes need to talk to each other, they need to talk externally. So yeah, they had bi-directional traffic requirements here. So, but we were basically able to solve that for them. So they're a customer today, thankfully. So I think this concludes our slides. So this is our final use case here. So Heather, thank you for joining me to discuss these important topics, and hoping that I could have you again in the future.
Anytime.